There is a particular kind of suffering that belongs almost exclusively to the sincere seeker. It is not the suffering of ignorance. The person who has never encountered these truths, who has never sat with Neville Goddard's teachings, who has never felt the electricity of the idea that consciousness is the only reality, that person suffers in a different way. They suffer without context, without the particular ache of someone who knows better and yet finds themselves afraid anyway. No, the suffering I am speaking of belongs to you. To the person who has read the books, who has done the visualizations, who has gone to sleep night after night in the drowsy twilight state, carefully, faithfully constructing the scene that would imply the wish fulfilled. The person who has felt, genuinely felt, the reality of the imagined state, who has carried the inner conversation of the person they wish to become, who has done everything that was asked of them, and then waited, and waited, and found in the waiting a silence so complete and so indifferent that the doubt began to creep in through the edges, the way cold air finds the gaps in an old house in winter. If you know that silence, this conversation is for you. Because today, we are going to address the single most misunderstood element of Neville Goddard's entire body of teaching. The element that, when it is not understood, causes the sincere seeker to abandon the work at precisely the moment the work is about to bear fruit. The element that separates those who witness their manifestations from those who die wondering why it never came. That element is what Neville called the bridge of incidence. And I want to begin not with a definition, but with a question. When you plant a seed in the ground, what do you do next? If you are a wise gardener, you water it. You ensure it has light. You tend the soil. And then, and this is the part I want you to sit with, you leave it alone. You do not dig it up to check whether it is growing. You do not reach into the earth with your fingers to help the root find its direction. You do not stand over it with anxious supervision, second-guessing the intelligence of the process that has been turning seeds into forests since long before any human being arrived to observe it. You leave it alone. Because you know, with the quiet certainty of someone who has seen this happen before, that the seed knows what to do. That the process, left to itself, will produce exactly what the seed contains. That your interference is not help. It is harm. Neville Goddard understood this principle not merely as a gardening metaphor, but as the fundamental law of consciousness. When you assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, when you plant that assumption deeply and sincerely into the soil of the subconscious mind, you have done the essential work. The creative work. The only work, in truth, that was ever yours to do. What follows is not your work. What follows belongs to an intelligence so vast, so precise, so perfectly organized, that your conscious mind, with all its cleverness and all its anxiety, could not improve upon it if it tried for 1,000 years. What follows is the bridge of incidence. Now, let me tell you precisely what that means. The bridge of incidents is the series of events, seemingly natural, seemingly ordinary, sometimes seemingly unrelated, that the universe constructs between your current circumstances and your desired reality. It is not a miracle in the Hollywood sense. It does not arrive with trumpets and flashing lights. It does not announce itself as the answer to your prayers. It arrives almost always wearing the costume of coincidence, of accident, of the ordinary friction and flow of daily life. A phone call you did not expect. A conversation that began as small talk and ended as a turning point. A door that closed, which you mourned, which turned out to be the very thing that directed your feet toward the open door you could not yet see. A delay that felt like abandonment, which was in fact a piece of exquisite timing. A loss that felt like punishment, which was in fact a redirection. These are the incidents of the bridge. And they are always, in retrospect, recognized as exactly right, as precisely what was needed, as the only possible path from where you were to where you are now. The tragedy, and it is a genuine tragedy, is that most people do not recognize the bridge while they are standing on it. They feel the phone call as an intrusion. They experience the closed door as a rejection. They interpret the delay as evidence that the process has failed. And so they do the one thing that disrupts the bridge more than any other. They interfere. They pick up the phone and make the call they were not supposed to make yet. They force the conversation that was not ready to be had. They pushed the door that was closed for a reason. They reach into the earth and disturb the root. And in doing so, they do not accelerate the manifestation. They delay it. Sometimes they prevent it entirely, not because the universe has withdrawn its cooperation, but because the interference has introduced a new set of circumstances that the bridge must now work around. This is the teaching we are exploring today. In its full depth, its full implication, and its full liberating power. Because when you truly understand the bridge of incidents, when you understand it not merely as an intellectual concept, but as a living, felt reality that you can orient your daily life around, something remarkable happens. The anxiety lifts. Not all at once. Not with the drama of a sudden conversion, but gradually, in the way that dawn arrives, so slowly you cannot point to the exact moment it became light, and yet at some point you look up and the darkness is simply gone. The anxiety lifts because you understand, finally and completely, that the outcome is not in your hands. It was never in your hands. Your hands were always meant for the inner work only. The planting, the assuming, the feeling. Everything else belongs to a process that is already underway. already moving, already constructing with a precision and an elegance that would take your breath away if you could see it whole, the exact bridge you need. Let us go deeper now into the mechanics of this. Because Neville was not a vague teacher. He was a precise one. And the precision of his teaching on this subject is where its liberation lives. Neville taught that imagination creates reality. Not that imagination influences reality, or contributes to reality, or gives reality a helpful nudge in the right direction. He taught that imagination creates reality. Fully. Completely. Without exception. The moment you assume a state, the moment you inhabit, with genuine feeling, the consciousness of the person who already has the thing you desire, that state begins its journey into physical form. Not might begin. Begins. The question is never whether it will manifest. Neville was absolutely clear on this. The assumption, held with feeling and conviction, must externalize. It is law. As impersonal and as reliable as the law of gravity. Drop something from a great height and it will fall. Assume a state with genuine feeling and it will manifest. The law does not make exceptions for your doubts, or your impatience, or your assessment of how impossible it seems. The question is only ever one of timing. And timing belongs entirely to the bridge of incidents. Now here is where most students of these teachings make their most costly mistake. They hear the teaching that the assumption must manifest, and they take that to mean that they should be able to see progress quickly. That if the law is as reliable as Neville says it is, then evidence should begin appearing in the outer world within days, perhaps hours. And when that evidence does not appear on the schedule the conscious mind has decided upon, they conclude one of three things. Either the law does not work, or they have done the inner work incorrectly, or they are somehow the exception, the one person for whom the law makes no provision. All three conclusions are wrong. And all three conclusions lead to the same destructive behavior. Interference. The desperate revision of the technique. The frantic searching for a better method, a more powerful visualization, a more precise feeling tone. The anxious monitoring of the outer world for signs, and the misreading of neutral events as evidence of failure. The reaching into the earth to check the root. And I want to say to you, with all the gentleness and all the firmness I can bring to this moment, that if any of this sounds familiar, you are not alone. You are, in fact, in very good company. Because this is the most human response imaginable to the silence between the planting and the harvest. But it is also the response that costs the most. And today, we are going to dismantle it completely. We are going to do that in three ways. First, we are going to deepen our understanding of why the bridge takes the time it takes, and why that timing is not a problem, but a gift. Second, we are going to sit with a story, a long and detailed story, about a woman named Caroline, whose bridge of incidents appeared at the precise moment she had decided the whole thing was a beautiful lie. Whose manifestation came through a door she had not only not planned for, but had actively tried to close. Whose life was transformed not despite the apparent failure of her circumstances, but through it. And third, we are going to close this time together with a deep immersion into what I call faith as a frequency, a meditation and a practice that will allow you to hold the state of trust not as an effort, but as a resting place. But before we do any of that, I want to address something that sits beneath all of it. Something that is rarely spoken about directly in discussions of these teachings, and yet which is, I believe, the root cause of almost every instance of interference. It is the confusion between the feeling of the wish fulfilled and the anxiety of the how. These two states feel, to the undiscerning mind, as though they are on the same spectrum, as though one is simply the more advanced version of the other, as though the person who is anxiously plotting the how is simply doing a more practical version of the work that the person who is resting in the feeling fulfilled is doing. They are not on the same spectrum. They are in opposition to each other. They are, in the most precise sense, mutually exclusive states. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the state of someone who already has the thing. And a person who already has the thing does not spend their days in anxious calculation of how it arrived. They simply live from it. They move through the world as the person who is already the beneficiary of exactly what they desired. They are not monitoring the mail for evidence. They are not lying awake rehearsing possible pathways. They are not performing the mental gymnastics of someone trying to figure out how to get from here to there. Because there is no here and there for them. There is only here. And here already contains the wish fulfilled. The anxiety of the how, by contrast, is the state of someone who emphatically does not have the thing and is desperately trying to acquire it. Every moment of anxious planning, every calculation of probabilities, every rehearsal of possible bridges is a moment of broadcasting with great emotional power and great creative force, the state of not yet having. And the subconscious mind, which creates your outer world from your inner state, receives that broadcast and faithfully, dutifully, lovingly reproduces it. More not yet having. More evidence of the gap. More circumstances that confirm the very reality you are trying to escape. This is not punishment. It is not the universe being cruel or indifferent. It is the law operating with perfect, impersonal precision, giving you exactly what you are in your dominant inner state asking for. The work, therefore, is not the work of planning the bridge. The work is the work of releasing the need to plan it, of returning again and again, from the anxiety of the how to the peace of the already, of inhabiting as your natural resting state the consciousness of the person for whom the desire is already a fact. This is simple to say. It is not always simple to do. And I do not stand before you pretending otherwise. But it is possible. It is learnable. And by the time we reach the end of our time together today, you will have both the understanding and the practice to make it the default orientation of your inner life. Let us talk about time. Not clock time, not calendar time, but the particular quality of time that exists between the assumption and the manifestation. The time that Neville Goddard students have always found the most difficult to navigate. The time that tests the sincerity of the inner work more thoroughly than any other season of the process. I want to reframe that time for you today, completely and permanently. Most people experience the interval between the planting and the harvest as empty time, as a void, as the absence of movement. They look at their outer circumstances and see nothing changing, and they interpret that stillness as evidence of stagnation, as proof that the inner work has not taken hold, as the silence of a universe that is either indifferent to their desire or actively withholding it. This interpretation is understandable. It is also completely, demonstrably wrong. The interval between the assumption and the manifestation is not empty time. It is the most densely occupied time in the entire process. Think for a moment about what is actually happening beneath the surface of the apparently still pond. When you assume a state with genuine feeling, you have introduced a new vibration into the field of your consciousness. A new blueprint. A new instruction to the subconscious mind, which is the architect of your physical reality. And that architect, upon receiving the new blueprint, does not simply wave a wand and produce the finished building in an instant. It begins to work. It surveys the existing landscape of your life, your relationships, your habits, your circumstances, your opportunities, and it begins the extraordinary, invisible labor of reorganizing all of those elements into the configuration that will most naturally and most efficiently produce the desired result. People must be moved into position. Circumstances must be arranged. Timing must be coordinated across a web of interdependencies so complex that no human conscious mind could map it even if it tried. The right conversation must be made possible by first arranging the right introduction, which requires first arranging the right circumstance, which requires first shifting something in the life of a person you have never met and may never meet, whose seemingly unrelated decision will one day create the opening through which your manifestation walks. This is the bridge of incidence. And every single one of its components is being assembled in the silence, in the invisible, in the time you are experiencing as empty and frustrating and apparently meaningless, while you are waiting and doubting and wondering if any of it is real. Neville used a specific phrase that I want to give you now, because it is one of the most useful phrases in his entire vocabulary for the student who is learning to trust the interval. He said that the bridge is always a series of events that seem entirely natural. Entirely natural. Let that land for a moment. Not supernatural. Not miraculous in the obvious sense. Not accompanied by the kind of unmistakable divine intervention that removes all need for faith because the evidence is simply too overwhelming to doubt. Natural. Ordinary looking. The kind of events that, if you were not paying attention, you might easily attribute to chance or coincidence or the random collision of unrelated circumstances. This is by design. And understanding why it is by design is one of the great liberations available to the student of these teachings. The universe does not need to be dramatic. It does not need to prove itself to you. It does not need to produce effects so spectacular that even your most skeptical inner critic is silenced. It simply needs to move from the current configuration of your life to the desired one by the most efficient and most elegant path available. And the most efficient path is almost always the one that works with the existing grain of reality rather than against it. The one that uses the natural momentum of people and circumstances already in motion, redirecting rather than reversing, opening rather than forcing, guiding rather than compelling. A phone call that seemed like a coincidence. A meeting that seemed like small talk. A delay that seemed like bad luck. A loss that seemed like punishment. These are the natural garments that the bridge wears. And the student who is watching for something more dramatic, something more obviously miraculous, will walk right past the bridge without stepping onto it. Now, I want to introduce you to a concept that I believe clarifies the bridge of incidents more precisely than any other frame I have encountered. Think of your desired manifestation as a destination on a map. A specific city you wish to reach. You know the city exists. You have been there in your imagination. You have walked its streets in your mind and felt the reality of being there. You have assumed the feeling of a person who lives there. Now, between your current location and that destination, there is a road. That road does not ask your permission before it takes its particular route. It does not consult your preference for the scenic path over the efficient one. It does not reroute itself because you have decided that the bridge on the north side of the valley would be more convenient than the bridge on the south side. The road goes where the road goes. And the road knows something you do not. It knows the landscape. It knows where the solid ground is and where the marsh is. It knows which pass through the mountain is open in winter and which is buried under 30 feet of snow. It knows things about the terrain of your life that your conscious mind, peering at the map with its limited two-dimensional vision, cannot possibly know. Your job is not to build the road. The road is already being built. Your job is not to supervise the construction, to offer your opinions on the routing, to second-guess the engineers. Your job is to stay in the car, to keep your destination clearly in mind, to remain the person who is going there, rather than the person who is frantically trying to figure out how to get there. To trust that the road, which is being built by an intelligence that can see the whole terrain at once, is taking the most direct route available. And when the road turns in a direction you did not expect, when it takes you through territory that seems to have nothing to do with your destination, when it passes through shadow before it reaches the light, to resist the urge to grab the wheel. Because grabbing the wheel is interference. And interference, in this context, does not mean bold action or decisive initiative. Interference means action that comes from the state of not yet having. Action that is driven by fear rather than guided by inspiration. Action that is, at its root, an expression of distrust in the process that is already underway. There is a very important distinction here, and I want to make it with great care because it is one that is frequently confused. Neville Goddard did not teach passivity. He did not teach that the student of these principles should sit in a chair and wait for the manifestation to arrive at their door like a delivered package. He was not a teacher of inaction. He taught inspired action. He taught that once the inner work is done, once the assumption is planted, and the state is genuinely inhabited, the student will be moved to take action by the process itself. Will feel the impulse to make the call, to write the letter, to accept the invitation, to take the unfamiliar road. That impulse, that inner prompting that feels different from anxious planning because it carries with it a quality of rightness, of ease, of natural fit that is the bridge speaking to you. That is the process communicating through the language of intuition and inspiration, telling you that this particular step is yours to take at this particular moment, in this particular way. The difference between inspired action and interference is felt, not calculated. Inspired action feels like opening a door that is already ajar. It feels like stepping into a current that is already flowing in your direction. It feels, even when it is unfamiliar or slightly uncomfortable, fundamentally right. Like the next natural step for the person you are becoming. Interference feels like forcing. It feels like pushing against a door that is clearly not ready to open. It carries with it a quality of strain, of effort disproportionate to the result, of swimming against a current rather than with it. It feels, even when it produces temporary results, ultimately hollow. Because it is coming from the wrong state. From fear rather than faith. From lack rather than abundance. From the person who does not yet have, rather than the person who already does. Learning to tell the difference between these two qualities of action is one of the great practical skills of this work. And like all skills, it develops with practice, with attention, with the willingness to pause before acting and ask the question, Is this coming from trust or from fear? Not always an easy question to answer honestly, but always the right question to ask. Now I want to speak about something that Neville addressed in his lectures with a frankness that I have always found deeply comforting. He acknowledged that the bridge will sometimes take you through difficulty, not as punishment, not as a test of worthiness, not as evidence that the manifestation is not coming, but as a necessary component of the route from where you are to where you are going. Sometimes the bridge begins with a loss, a job that ends, a relationship that concludes, a plan that falls apart, a door that closes with a finality that feels, in the moment, like devastation. And in those moments, the mind that does not understand the bridge of incidents will interpret the loss as evidence of failure, as proof that the work did not hold, as the universe's verdict on the desire. But Neville taught something radical about those moments. He taught that they are often the first step of the bridge, that the thing you are mourning is frequently the thing that was standing between you and the thing you asked for, that the door that just closed was blocking the view of the door that is about to open, that the loss is not the end of the story. It is the inciting incident of a new one. This is not a comfortable teaching in the moment of the loss. I will not pretend otherwise. When the thing you valued is gone, when the circumstance you depended upon has changed, when the ground beneath your feet has shifted, I said, the invitation to trust the process requires more courage than almost anything else I know. But here is what I have observed across a lifetime of sitting with these principles and watching them operate in real lives, including my own. The people who hold their state through the difficulty, who do not abandon the assumption when the outer world seems to contradict it, who do not reach into the earth and disturb the root when the silence becomes uncomfortable, those are the people who one day find themselves standing at the destination they imagined, looking back at the road that brought them there, and understanding, with a clarity that brings tears to the eyes, exactly why every single incident on that bridge was necessary. Every delay, every detour, every loss, every closed door, every moment of doubt that they pushed through. Every morning they woke up and chose the assumption again despite the evidence of their senses. All of it was the bridge. All of it was the process working, not against them, but for them, in the only way it could, given the landscape of their life and the destination they had chosen. I want to tell you about one of those people now. Her name was Caroline, and her story is one that I return to again and again when I need to be reminded of what it looks like when the bridge appears at the last possible moment, after the person who needed it most had already decided it was never coming. Caroline was 54 years old when her life as she had constructed it came apart. she had spent 22 years in the same company. A mid-sized marketing firm in the Midwest, the kind of place where institutional knowledge was valued, where relationships ran deep, where she had risen, slowly and with great competence, to a position of genuine authority and genuine respect. She was good at her work. She was known for her steadiness, her creativity, her ability to see the shape of a problem before her colleagues had finished describing it. She was also, by the time she turned 54, quietly and privately exhausted. Not in the way that a vacation fixes, in the deeper way. The way that accumulates over years of doing work that is competent but not calling. Work that pays the bills and earns the respect and fills the calendar, but does not, at the end of the day, leave the person doing it feeling that they have spent themselves on something that mattered. She had a dream, though she rarely spoke it aloud. Had barely admitted it to herself in the full light of conscious awareness. The dream was to teach. Not in a classroom necessarily, though that was part of it. But to transmit something. To take the 22 years of hard-won understanding she had accumulated and give it to people who needed it. To write. To speak. To be the person in the room whose words changed the way other people saw their work, their possibilities, their own capabilities. She had found Neville Goddard's teachings 3 years before the story I am about to tell you begins. Had read his books with the particular intensity of someone who recognizes a truth they have always known but never had language for. Had begun the practice of revision, of living in the end, of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Her wish, stated in the quiet of her imagination, was this: to be doing work that felt like her truest expression. Work that combined her expertise with her voice. Work that reached people at the level where real change happens. Work that, when she lay down at the end of the day, left her tired in the good way, the way of someone who has spent themselves fully on something that mattered. She had assumed that state, had felt it genuinely, had gone to sleep in it, had carried it through her mornings, had returned to it when the doubt arose, which it did regularly, with the persistence of a habit that has had many years to establish itself. And then, 14 months after she began the inner work in earnest, the company announced a restructuring. The restructuring was announced on a Tuesday morning in October. Caroline heard about it the way most people hear about these things, not from a direct conversation with someone in authority, but from the particular quality of silence that descends on an office when something significant is being decided behind closed doors. The hushed hallway conversations that stop when she walked past. The calendar invitations that appeared and then disappeared. The way her director looked at her in the Wednesday morning meeting, not unkindly, but with the careful neutrality of someone who is holding information they are not yet permitted to share. She knew before she was told. The way you always know when you have been somewhere long enough and paid close enough attention that the ground is shifting beneath you. The formal conversation came on a Friday afternoon. Her position, along with 11 others, was being eliminated. The company was consolidating departments, moving functions to a centralized hub in another city, thanking her sincerely and genuinely for her 22 years of contribution. There was a severance package. It was fair. There was a letter of recommendation already drafted, and it was glowing because everything it said was true. She drove home in a state she would later describe as a strange, underwater calm. Not the peace of acceptance, not yet. The calm of shock. The temporary anesthesia that the nervous system provides in the first hours after a significant loss, before the feeling returns and the full weight of what has happened makes itself known. That weight arrived on Saturday morning. She woke early before the light and lay in the dark with the specific quality of fear that belongs to the person who is 54 years old and has just lost the thing around which their entire professional identity was organized. Not the young person's fear, which carries within it the energy of possibility, the sense that there is time and room and plenty of road still ahead. The older fear. The one that does its arithmetic in the dark. The one that counts the years remaining and measures them against the size of the gap and finds the numbers unconvincing. She lay there and she did the thing that every sincere student of these teachings does at least once in their journey. She had a conversation with the work itself. An internal reckoning. A moment of sitting with all of it. The 3 years of practice, the faithfully constructed imaginal scenes, the genuine feelings she had cultivated, the assumptions she had held, and saying, quietly and honestly, into the dark of that early Saturday morning, was any of it real? Because from where she was lying, in the wreckage of the professional life she had built over 2 decades, it did not feel real. It felt like beautiful philosophy that had met the wall of actual circumstances and found that wall considerably more solid than the philosophy had promised. She did not get up and do her revision practice that morning. She did not assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. She lay in the dark and she grieved. And I want to say something about that grieving, because it matters to the story and it matters to the teaching. The grieving was not a failure of faith. It was not evidence that the work had been insufficient. It was not a spiritual mistake that needed to be corrected. It was human. It was honest. And in its own way, it was part of the bridge. Because what was dying in Caroline that Saturday morning was not just a job. What was dying was the version of herself that had organized her life around work, that was competent but not calling. The version that had kept the dream of her true expression at a safe and manageable distance, not because she lacked courage entirely, but because the structure of her existing life had made the dream feel optional. Something for later. Something for when the time was right. The structure was gone now. And with it, the excuse. She did not know this yet. In the dark of that Saturday morning, she could not see what was dying clearly enough to understand what it was making room for. She only knew the loss. And she allowed herself to know it fully, which is, I believe, one of the bravest things a human being can do. The weeks that followed were difficult. She updated her resume with the particular indignity of someone who has not needed a resume in 22 years and finds the exercise of reducing a career to a single page both reductive and humbling. She reached out to her professional network with a brightness in her emails that did not entirely reflect her inner state. She applied for positions that were similar to the one she had lost, because similarity felt like safety, and safety was what the frightened part of her was asking for. She received polite responses, encouraging initial conversations, and then, in most cases, silence. Or the carefully worded email that begins with, "Thank you for your time," and ends with, "We have decided to move forward with another candidate." 6 weeks in, she had not received a single offer. 8 weeks in, she had received 2 offers, both of which were for positions so clearly beneath her experience and her compensation expectations that accepting them would have felt less like a step forward and more like a quiet surrender to the arithmetic of the dark. She declined both, and felt, in the declining, a new and more complex fear. The fear that she had made the wrong choice, that she had been too proud, that the market was telling her something about her value that she was refusing to hear. It was around this time that she returned, tentatively and without much conviction, to the practice. Not with the fresh enthusiasm of her earlier work. With something quieter, more worn. She sat with Neville's words again, not searching for new technique, but reading the way you read something when you are not sure you believe it anymore, but cannot quite bring yourself to put it down. The way you hold on to something that has given you comfort, even when the comfort is not currently available. She read his lecture on the Bridge of Incidents, and something in it caught her, not with the electric recognition of her earlier encounters with his work, but with a slower, deeper quality of attention. He wrote that the bridge is always a series of events that seem entirely natural. That the student must not try to consciously devise the means to achieve the end. That the how is none of your business. That your business is the end itself. The state. The feeling. The assumption held steady regardless of what the outer world is currently presenting. She sat with that for a long time. And then she did something that, in retrospect, she would identify as the turning point of the entire story. Though it did not feel like a turning point at the time. It felt like a very small, very quiet act of surrender. She stopped applying for jobs that were versions of the job she had lost. Not dramatically. Not with the energy of a bold new direction. She simply stopped. And in the space that the stopping created, she began, for the first time in 3 years of practice, to assume the feeling of the wish she had actually made. Not the safe wish. Not the wish for another corporate position with a comparable title and a familiar structure. The real wish. the one about the work that felt like her truest expression. The writing, the teaching, the transmitting of 22 years of hard-won understanding to people who needed it. The voice in the room whose words changed the way other people saw their possibilities. She assumed that feeling not because she could see any pathway to it. There was no pathway visible. She had no platform, no audience, no publishing contract, no speaking engagements, no institutional affiliation that would lend credibility to the reinvention she was imagining. She had a laptop, a spare bedroom she used as a study, and the particular combination of desperation and clarity that arrives when the safe options have run out and the only thing left is the true one. She assumed the feeling anyway. Every morning, before the fear arithmetic could begin, she sat in the spare bedroom and felt what it would feel like to be the person she actually wanted to be. Not perfectly. Not without interruption from the doubt and the worry and the ongoing awareness of her dwindling severance. But consistently, with the quiet stubbornness of someone who has decided, without entirely knowing why, to trust the process one more time. 3 weeks after she made that shift, she received an email. It was from a woman named Diane, who had been a peripheral acquaintance from a professional conference Caroline had attended 4 years earlier. They had spoken briefly at a dinner, had connected on a professional networking site, had exchanged perhaps 3 messages in the years since. Not a close contact. Not someone Caroline would have thought to reach out to or thought of at all in the context of her current situation. The email was casual in its tone. Diane mentioned that she had been thinking about Caroline, that she had recently taken a role leading the professional development program at a regional business school, that she was looking for practitioners with real-world experience to develop and deliver curriculum for their executive education division. She wondered if Caroline might be interested in a conversation. Caroline read the email twice, then a 3rd time. And then she did something she had not done in months. She laughed. Not the careful, managed expression of someone maintaining composure. A real laugh. The laugh of someone who has just seen something so precisely right that the only possible response is a kind of joyful astonishment. Because the email was not just an opportunity. It was the description of exactly what she had been assuming. Not approximately. Not in the general vicinity of her desire. Exactly. The transmission of her expertise. The teaching. The voice in the room. The work that mattered. Arriving through a channel she had not planned. Through a connection she had not cultivated for this purpose. Through a door she had not known existed. Through the bridge. She replied to the email that same afternoon. The conversation happened the following week. And what unfolded over the next 6 months was, in the language of Neville Goddard's teaching, a textbook bridge of incidents. The initial curriculum development work led to an invitation to deliver a keynote at the school's annual executive forum. The keynote was recorded and posted online, where it reached an audience far beyond the room in which it was delivered. That reach led to a speaking inquiry from a professional association, which led to two more, which led to a conversation with a small but respected publisher about a book based on the framework she had developed over 22 years of practice. 18 months after she had lain in the dark of that Saturday morning, asking whether any of it was real, Caroline was doing the work she had always wanted to do. Teaching, writing, transmitting, spending herself fully on something that mattered. Tired at the end of the day in the good way. And here is the detail of her story that I want you to carry with you long after this conversation ends. The bridge of incidents that led her there had begun, not with Diane's email, but with the restructuring announcement on that Tuesday morning in October. The loss was the first incident of the bridge. The closed door was the opening move of the process. The thing she mourned was the thing that had been standing between her and the life she had asked for. And the universe, working with the patient precision of an architect who can see the whole terrain at once, had moved it out of the way. Not cruelly, not indifferently, with the exact force necessary to create the exact opening required for the exact bridge that would lead to the exact destination she had assumed in her imagination. She could not have seen this from inside the loss. No one can ever see the bridge from inside the first incident. The view is too narrow, the feeling too immediate, the mind too occupied with the evidence of the present to perceive the architecture of what is being built. But the bridge was being built. Every day of the 8 weeks of rejections and declining severance and dark Saturday mornings, the bridge was being built. The right people were being moved into position. The right timing was being arranged. Diane was taking her new role. The professional development program was being conceived. The opening was being created. All of it invisible. All of it natural looking. All of it exactly right. And the only thing Caroline had to do, the only thing that was ever asked of her beyond the initial inner work, was to hold her state through the difficulty. To return, imperfectly and persistently, to the assumption of the wish fulfilled. To resist the interference of forcing a path that was not her path. To trust, in the face of evidence that seemed to contradict it entirely, that the bridge was coming. She almost did not make it. There were mornings when the trust was a thread so thin, she was not sure it would hold the weight of another day. There were evenings when she wrote in her journal the words, "I do not know if I believe any of this anymore," and meant every one of them. And the bridge came anyway. Because the bridge was never contingent on the perfection of her faith. It was contingent on the reality of her assumption. And the assumption, planted 3 years earlier and returned to again and again, despite the doubt, had taken root in the only place that matters. in the subconscious mind, in the architect's office, in the place where the blueprint of her desired life had been quietly, patiently, invisibly directing the construction of the bridge that would lead her there. This is the teaching. This is what the bridge of incidents means in the lived reality of a real human life. Not a theory, not a metaphor, a process. An actual, reliable, impersonal process that is operating in your life right now, whether you can see it or not. The question is not whether the bridge is being built. The question is whether you will still be standing when it arrives. Let us talk about the art of standing still. Not physical stillness. Not the passivity of someone who has given up and is simply waiting for fate to deliver its verdict. The standing still of someone who has done the inner work, who knows the bridge is being built, and who has made the conscious, daily, sometimes hourly decision not to interfere with a process that is already underway and already working. This is one of the most demanding practices in the entire curriculum of conscious living. Not because it requires great effort in the conventional sense, but because it requires the suspension of the most deeply conditioned reflex a human being possesses. The reflex to do something. We live in a culture that equates action with progress and stillness with stagnation. From the earliest age, we are taught that the way to get what you want is to work harder, move faster, push more persistently against the resistance. That the person who succeeds is the person who outworks, outmaneuvers, outstrategizes everyone else in the field. That waiting is weakness, and patience is the consolation prize of people who lack the drive to make things happen. This conditioning runs deep. Deeper, in many cases, than the conscious commitment to these teachings. And it surfaces with particular intensity in precisely the moments when the bridge is being built, when the outer world is quiet and the inner world is holding steady, and every conditioned instinct is screaming that something must be done, that this stillness is dangerous, that the manifest world will not change unless the hands are moving and the feet are marching and the mind is scheming the next step. And so the hands move, and the feet march, and the mind schemes. And the bridge which was coming, which was almost ready, must now reroute around the interference. I want to give you a new understanding of what standing still actually means in the context of this teaching. Because I think the phrase is often misunderstood as a counsel of inaction, when in fact it is a counsel of a very specific and very demanding kind of action. The action of maintaining the state. When Neville taught his students to stand still, he was not telling them to stop living their lives. He was telling them to stop living from the wrong state, to stop taking actions that were expressions of fear and lack and the desperate need to force an outcome, and to start, or rather to continue, living from the state of the wish fulfilled. To let every action that was taken be an action that arose naturally from that state, rather than a frantic attempt to compensate for the apparent absence of it. A person who already has the thing they desired does not scramble. They do not force. They do not lie awake rehearsing contingency plans. They move through their days with the particular quality of ease that belongs to someone who is not in a hurry because they are already where they need to be. They take action, yes, often significant and decisive action, but that action has a different quality to it. It comes from sufficiency rather than scarcity. From the inside of the desired state rather than the outside of it. That is the standing still Neville was pointing toward. Not the absence of movement, but the presence of the right state from which all movement arises. Now, I want to address a question that arises with great regularity and great sincerity from students of these teachings who are working through exactly this challenge. The question is this: how do I maintain the state when the outer circumstances are actively, loudly, persistently contradicting it? When the bills are arriving and the account is diminishing and the body is showing symptoms and the relationship is strained and every piece of external evidence is pointing in the opposite direction from the state I am trying to inhabit, how do I hold the assumption without it feeling like a lie I am telling myself? It is a fair question. It is an honest question. And it deserves an honest answer. The answer begins with a distinction that Neville made repeatedly throughout his teaching, a distinction so important that I want to give it all the space it deserves. The distinction is between the facts and the truth. The facts are what the senses report. The balance in the account, the diagnosis in the report, the silence where the call should have come, the closed door, the rejection letter, the body that is not yet healed, the relationship that is not yet mended. These are facts. They are real in the sense that they are currently manifest in the physical world. Neville never asked his students to deny them or pretend they were not there. The truth is something deeper and more fundamental than any current arrangement of facts. The truth is that consciousness creates reality. The truth is that the assumption, sincerely held, must externalize. The truth is that the bridge is being built in the invisible, in the realm where the facts of tomorrow are being assembled from the states of today. The truth is that the current arrangement of facts is not a verdict. It is a snapshot, a single frame from a film that is still being made. Maintaining the state does not mean denying the facts. It means refusing to grant the facts the authority to define the truth. It means saying, with full awareness of the current circumstances, I see what is here now, and I know that what is here now is the result of states I have previously inhabited, and I am inhabiting a new state now, and that new state is already producing new facts that have not yet arrived in my field of vision, but are on their way, being assembled by a process I do not need to supervise. That is not denial. That is the most sophisticated, most courageous, most accurate reading of the situation available to a person who understands how consciousness operates. Neville called this attitude toward the facts of the outer world a kind of magnificent indifference. Not the indifference of someone who does not care. The indifference of someone who is not fooled. Who knows the difference between a current snapshot and a final verdict? Who has enough understanding of the process to be unmoved by the apparent stillness of the interval because they know that stillness is not emptiness? It is the fullness of a process that has not yet broken the surface. This magnificent indifference is something that is developed over time. It is not the natural first response to difficult circumstances. It is a trained response, a practiced response, the fruit of a sustained commitment to seeing reality through the eyes of consciousness rather than through the eyes of the senses. And the practice of developing it is, in essence, the practice of returning. You will lose the state. This is not a failure. It is a given. Every sincere student of these teachings loses the state, sometimes dozens of times in a single day, particularly in the early period of the work, and particularly when the outer circumstances are most challenging. The mind wanders back to the facts. The fear reasserts itself. The old arithmetic begins running in the background. The assumption feels thin and unconvincing and slightly absurd against the solid weight of what the senses are reporting. And in that moment, the practice is not to berate yourself for having lost the state. The practice is simply to return to it. Gently, without drama, without the added burden of self-criticism for the lapse, with the quiet, matter-of-fact commitment of someone who knows where they are going and who simply, without fuss, reorients in that direction when they find they have strayed. Return to the feeling. Return to the assumption. Return to the inner conversation of the person who already has the thing. Return to the state of someone for whom the bridge is not a desperate hope, but a known fact, not yet visible to the eyes, but entirely real to the consciousness that created it. And then return again the next time. And the time after that. Not perfectly. Persistently. Because persistence in returning to the state is the practical definition of faith in the context of this teaching. Not the faith of certainty, the kind that never wavers and never doubts. The faith of commitment, the kind that wavers and doubts and returns anyway. The kind that Caroline practiced in her spare bedroom in the months between the loss and the email, when the trust was a thread so thin she was not sure it would hold another day, and she chose to trust it anyway. That is the faith that builds bridges. Not the pristine, untroubled faith of someone who has never been tested. The battered, persistent, quietly determined faith of someone who has been tested and has chosen again and again to return to the assumption regardless. I want to speak now about a specific form of interference that is subtle enough to escape the notice of many students and common enough that I believe it deserves its own careful attention. It is the interference of premature interpretation. This is what happens when the student, having planted the assumption and begun to wait for the bridge, starts to decide in advance what the bridge should look like, what form it should take, which specific incidents it should consist of, which door should open, which person should call, which circumstance should change first. It is, in its essence, the attempt to plan the bridge while simultaneously claiming to trust the process. And it is one of the most common ways in which well-intentioned students inadvertently delay their own manifestations. Because when you decide in advance what the bridge should look like, you have done two damaging things simultaneously. First, you have narrowed the field of possibility to only the pathways your conscious mind can currently imagine. And the conscious mind, for all its cleverness, can only work with the information currently available to it. It can only conceive of bridges made from materials it has already encountered. It cannot conceive of the bridge that uses materials it does not yet know exist. It cannot map the route that runs through the territory it has not yet visited. But the process that builds the bridge can. The subconscious mind, working in collaboration with the vast, invisible field of intelligence that Neville variously called God, the Father, Infinite Mind, operates with full knowledge of all possible pathways, not just the ones currently visible from your particular vantage point. It can use connections you have not made, opportunities you have not recognized, people you have not met, timing you could not have calculated. When you pre-decide the pathway, you are effectively telling this infinite intelligence to ignore all of that and use only what your limited conscious awareness can currently see. You are trading the most powerful possible bridge for the most predictable one. And second, when the bridge does not take the form you predicted, and it almost never does, because the most efficient route is rarely the most obvious one, you interpret its absence as evidence that the manifestation is not coming. When in fact the bridge is coming, just not through the door you were watching. And while you are staring at the door you expected, the actual bridge is quietly being completed through a door you never thought to look at. Caroline was not watching Diane's door. She had not identified Diane as a potential pathway. She had not maintained that professional connection with any strategic intention related to her desire. She had simply, in the 3 weeks before the email arrived, stopped watching any particular door at all. Had surrendered the how entirely. Had returned to the what and the feeling of the what, and had left the how to the process. And the process, freed from her supervision, had used exactly the pathway it needed to use. This is the practical wisdom of releasing the how. Not just as a spiritual principle, though it is that. As an entirely practical strategy for allowing the most efficient possible bridge to be constructed without interference. The how is not your department. It has never been your department. And the sooner you genuinely, not just philosophically, but practically and emotionally release it, the sooner the bridge can take its most direct and most elegant form. There is one more thing I want to address before we move into our closing meditation, and it is perhaps the most tender point in this entire conversation. It is the question of what to do when you genuinely do not know whether what you are experiencing is the interval before the bridge or evidence that the assumption was wrong. Because this question arises. In the long silences between the planting and the harvest, there are moments when the distinction between faithful waiting and self-deception becomes genuinely unclear. When the honest mind asks itself, am I trusting the process, or am I simply refusing to accept that this particular desire is not aligned with my highest good? It is a question worth sitting with. And Neville's answer to it was characteristically direct. He said, test it. Not by looking at the outer world for evidence. The outer world is always a delayed report of inner states already past. Test it by returning to the inner state of the wish fulfilled and noticing what happens in the body. If the assumption, when you inhabit it sincerely, produces a feeling of genuine rightness, of deep recognition, of the particular peace that comes from being aligned with something true, then the desire is real, and the bridge is coming, and the work is to persist. If the assumption, when you inhabit it, produces a feeling of strain or hollowness, a sense of performing rather than being, a quality of forcing something that does not want to be forced, then it may be worth sitting with the desire itself. Is less than has hon. 5 hash is greater than. With whether what you are asking for is truly what you want, or whether it is what you have decided you should want, or what you think will finally make you safe, or what you are pursuing because you are afraid of what it would mean about you if you stopped pursuing it. This is not a counsel to abandon your desires at the first sign of difficulty. The resistance of the conditioned mind to new assumptions is real and should not be mistaken for a signal that the desire is wrong. There is a difference between the discomfort of stretching into a new and larger self and the hollowness of reaching for something that is not truly yours. You will learn to tell the difference. The body knows. The felt sense of genuine alignment has a quality to it that is unmistakable once you have experienced it even once. And the felt sense of forcing has its own equally unmistakable quality. Trust the body. Trust the feeling. Trust the process of coming to know your own truth more clearly through the practice itself. And when the assumption feels right, when the inner state of the wish fulfilled produces that quality of genuine recognition and deep peace, hold it. Hold it through the silence. Hold it through the facts that seem to contradict it. Hold it through the moments when the trust is a thread so thin you are not sure it will survive the night. Because the bridge is being built. Even now. Even in the silence. Even in the dark of this particular Saturday morning of your life. It is being built. And it is coming. And it will arrive through a door you may not have thought to watch, at a time you could not have calculated, through a series of events so entirely natural that you might almost mistake them for coincidence. Almost. But not quite. Because by then you will know better. You will recognize the bridge when you step onto it. And you will feel, in the stepping, the particular quality of gratitude that belongs to someone who trusted the process all the way through and found, on the other side of the waiting, exactly what they had assumed was there. We have traveled a considerable distance together today. We have examined the nature of the bridge of incidents with the precision it deserves. We have sat with Caroline and watched her bridge appear at the precise moment she had nearly stopped believing it would come. We have looked honestly at the mechanics of interference and the subtle ways in which the most sincere students of these teachings can inadvertently delay what they are trying to accelerate. And now I want to bring all of it together. Not as a summary, not as a review, but as a living experience. Because there is a level of understanding that words can point toward, but cannot deliver. A level that is accessed not through the intellect, but through the body, through the breath, through the felt sense of a truth that has moved from the mind into the marrow. That is where we are going now. What I am offering you in these final pages of our time together is what I call faith as a frequency. Not faith as a doctrine. Not faith as a performance of belief you do not quite feel. Not the strained, white-knuckled faith of someone gripping the assumption with desperate intensity because they are terrified of what will happen if they let go. Faith as a frequency is something entirely different. It is a quality of inner being, a vibration, a resting state. The particular tone of a consciousness that has genuinely released the outcome to the process and has found in that releasing not the anxiety of uncertainty, but the peace of trust. It is the frequency of someone who has planted the seed and is content to let the seed do what seeds do, who has set the course and is at peace in the traveling, who has done the inner work and has released the outer work to the intelligence that has always been better equipped to handle it than the conscious mind ever was. This frequency is available to you right now, in this moment, regardless of what your outer circumstances look like, regardless of how long you have been waiting, regardless of how thin the trust has felt in the long silences of the interval. It is available because it is not something you have to create. It is something you have to remember. You have felt this frequency before. Every human being has. You have felt it in moments of genuine surrender, when you released a burden you had been carrying too long and felt the extraordinary lightness of that releasing. You have felt it in moments of deep gratitude, when the beauty of something ordinary broke through the noise of daily life and left you, for a few seconds, simply present and simply thankful and simply at peace. You have felt it in moments of deep trust, when you placed something precious in the hands of someone reliable and felt the relief of no longer having to hold it alone. Those moments were not accidents. They were glimpses of your natural frequency, the frequency beneath the fear, the tone that is always there, always available, always waiting beneath the noise of the conditioned mind's endless calculation and commentary. The practice of faith as a frequency is simply the practice of returning to that tone more deliberately, more consistently, and for longer periods of time than the conditioned mind is currently accustomed to allowing. And we are going to practice it now. I want you to find a comfortable position. If you are seated, let your back be supported and your hands rest open in your lap. If you are lying down, let your body be fully received by whatever surface holds you. Let there be nothing to manage and nothing to maintain. Close your eyes if you are comfortable doing so. And take one breath that is slightly deeper and slightly slower than the last one. Not a forced breath. Not a performed breath. Simply a breath that goes a little further than usual, that reaches a little deeper into the lungs, that takes a little longer to release. And as you release it, let the surface concerns of the day go with it. Not permanently. They will be waiting when you return. But for now, for this particular quality of time, let them rest outside the door. Good. Now I want you to bring to mind the desire. Not as a problem to be solved. Not as a gap to be closed. Not as a distance between where you are and where you want to be. Simply as a fact of your inner world. The thing you want exists. It exists in your imagination with a vividness and a reality that the outer world has not yet caught up with. But that is simply a matter of timing. The outer world is always catching up with the inner world. Always. Without exception. That is the law. The desire exists. The assumption has been planted. The bridge is being built. Let those three facts rest in your awareness now like 3 stones placed in still water. Not as affirmations to be repeated with urgent intensity. As quiet, settled, unargued truths. The desire exists. The assumption has been planted. The bridge is being built. Now I want you to shift your attention from the desire itself to the feeling of someone for whom the desire is already a fact. Not the feeling of wanting it. Not the feeling of hoping for it. Not the feeling of almost believing it is possible. The feeling of already having it. Let that feeling begin wherever it naturally begins in your body. For some people, it begins in the chest as a warmth, a loosening, a gentle expansion in the area around the heart. For others, it begins in the shoulders as a releasing of the held tension of someone who has been carrying something heavy and has finally, gratefully, set it down. For others, it begins in the breath itself, which simply goes deeper when the nervous system no longer needs to brace against the possibility of lack. Find it wherever it is for you. Do not manufacture it. Do not perform it. Simply allow it to arise, however tentatively, however quietly, from the part of you that already knows the desire is real, is less than #. 5# is greater than. Let it be small if it is small. A flicker is enough. A single degree of warmth in the chest is enough. The slightest easing of the held breath is enough. Because you are not trying to force a flood. You are simply opening the channel. And a channel needs only the smallest opening to begin its work. Now, from within that feeling, however slight, I want you to bring to awareness the bridge. Not what it looks like. Not the specific incidents you expect it to consist of. not the pathway you have decided it should take. Simply the fact of it. The bridge exists. It is being constructed right now, in this moment, in the invisible field of your life, by an intelligence that can see the whole terrain at once and is using every resource available to it to bring you to the destination you have assumed. Let that be a felt reality rather than an intellectual concept. Let it land in the body the way a genuine truth lands, not as an idea you are evaluating, but as something you are recognizing. The bridge is being built. Right now. In the silence. In the invisible. In the interval that feels like waiting, but is in fact the most densely occupied time in the entire process. It is being built by the same intelligence that turns seeds into forests and acorns into oaks, and the wordless desire of every living thing into the circumstances that allow it to flourish. It has never failed. Not once. In the entire history of consciousness operating in physical form, the assumption sincerely held has never failed to externalize. It will not fail now. Not for you. Not in this situation. Not in these circumstances. Not after this much waiting. The law makes no exceptions, and you are not the exception. Let that settle now. Let the particular relief of that land wherever it needs to land in your body. You are not the exception. The bridge is coming. Now I want to deepen this frequency by introducing something that Neville spoke of often and that I consider one of the most powerful practices available to the student who is learning to inhabit the state of trust. It is the practice of gratitude in advance. Not gratitude for what has already arrived. Not the rehearsal of blessings already received, though that practice has its own extraordinary value. Gratitude for what is on its way. Gratitude expressed now, in the present tense of your inner life, for the bridge that is being built, for the manifestation that is coming, for the life that is already real in the invisible and has simply not yet broken the surface of the physical world. This practice works because gratitude is the emotional signature of having. You cannot be genuinely grateful for something you do not, on some level, believe you have. The feeling of true gratitude, the deep, warm, chest-expanding quality of genuine thankfulness, is the feeling of a person in possession of something they value. It is the feeling of abundance, of sufficiency, of being on the receiving end of something good. When you practice gratitude in advance, when you feel genuine thankfulness for the bridge that is coming, as though it has already arrived, you are broadcasting the frequency of having with the most emotionally powerful signal available to a human consciousness. And the subconscious mind, receiving that signal, reorganizes the outer world to match it. Not as a reward for your gratitude, as a reflection of it, as the inevitable outward expression of the inward state you are inhabiting. So let us practice this now. From within the feeling of the wish already fulfilled, from within the quiet warmth of the state you have been inhabiting in these past few minutes, I want you to let a feeling of gratitude arise. not forced, not manufactured, simply allowed. Gratitude for the bridge, for the invisible work that is being done on your behalf right now, in this moment, while you sit in this stillness. For the intelligence that is moving people into position and arranging circumstances and creating openings that do not yet exist in your field of vision, but are being prepared with a care and a precision that would take your breath away if you could see it whole. Gratitude for the timing, which is not your timing and which is better than your timing, because it takes into account factors you cannot currently see and coordinates a complexity you could not currently manage. Gratitude for the desire itself, which is not a cruel joke or an impossible standard or a measure of your inadequacy, but a signal, a communication from the deepest part of your being about the life that is possible for you, the life that is in fact your natural inheritance, the life that the process of consciousness is always and already moving you toward. Gratitude for the waiting. Yes, even the waiting. Because the waiting is not emptiness. The waiting is the bridge under construction. The waiting is the interval in which the most complex and most essential work of the entire process is being done. The waiting is the seed in the ground, doing in the dark what it could not do in the light. Let the gratitude be as full as it wants to be. Let it expand to fill the chest, to soften the shoulders, to reach the hands and the feet and the quiet spaces behind the eyes. Let it be the dominant frequency of this moment. And then let it be the frequency you carry when you open your eyes and return to the ordinary world. Not as a performance, not as a mask over fear, as a genuine, inhabited practice state of being that you return to again and again, as many times as needed, for as long as the bridge takes to complete. This is faith as a frequency. This is the standing still that Neville was pointing toward. Not the stillness of someone who has given up. The stillness of someone who has done the work, who trusts the process, who knows the bridge is being built, and who has found, in the knowing, a peace that does not require the outer world to change before it is available. A peace that is here now, in this breath, in this body, in this moment, regardless of the facts, regardless of the silence, regardless of how long the interval has been or how much further it has left to run. The peace is here now. The bridge is being built, and it is coming. Take one more breath before we continue. Let it be slower than the last one. Let it carry with it everything we have explored together today: the understanding, the story, the practice, the frequency, and let it settle all of it a little deeper into the body, a little further beneath the reach of the restless, calculating, interfering mind. Good. I want to speak to you now, not as a teacher addressing students, but as one traveler speaking to another. Because I have stood where you are standing. I have known the silence of the interval. I have felt the trust grow thin in the long weeks, when nothing in the outer world seemed to be moving. I have had the conversations with myself in the dark, the honest, difficult conversations that ask whether any of this is real or whether it is simply the most sophisticated form of wishful thinking a restless mind has ever devised to comfort itself against the hard edges of an indifferent world. And I have come through those conversations with something I could not have acquired any other way. Not certainty in the philosophical sense. Not the absence of doubt. Something more durable than either of those. The experiential knowledge that the bridge comes. Not might come. Not comes for some people in some circumstances when the conditions are favorable. Comes. Always. For everyone. Through channels that the conscious mind could not have predicted. At times that the impatient self could not have accepted in advance. Through doors that were not on the map, the frightened mind was consulting. But always comes. The law does not have a provision for failure. The assumption sincerely held does not have a cancellation clause. The bridge does not have a condition attached to it that reads, except when the waiting has gone on too long, or except when the outer circumstances are particularly discouraging, or except when the person doing the inner work is imperfect in their faith and inconsistent in their practice, and sometimes lies awake in the dark, wondering if any of it is real. There is no such clause. The law is impersonal, and its impersonality is not its coldness. It is its mercy. It works for you, not because you have earned it, not because you have been sufficiently faithful, or sufficiently disciplined, or sufficiently free of doubt, but because it works. Because that is what it does. Because the assumption made real in consciousness must become real in form, not as a reward for the quality of your practice, but as the inevitable outworking of a law, as reliable and as impersonal as the rising of the sun. This is what I want you to carry out of this conversation today. Not a technique, though the techniques are real and valuable and worth practicing daily. Not an intellectual framework, though the framework is sound and the understanding it provides is genuinely liberating. The bridge comes. Whatever you have assumed, whatever desire you have planted in the soil of your consciousness with genuine feeling and sincere conviction, the bridge to that reality is already under construction. Has been from the moment the assumption was made. Is being built right now, in this moment, in the invisible field of your life, by the only intelligence in existence that has full knowledge of every available pathway and the will and the capacity to use all of them on your behalf. You do not need to know how it is being built. You do not need to supervise the construction. You do not need to identify the incidents in advance to decide which door should open or which person should call or which circumstance should shift first. You need only to do 3 things. Hold the state. Return to it when you lose it, and you will lose it. That is not failure, that is being human. Return to it without drama and without self-criticism, simply and persistently, the way a compass needle returns to north after being disturbed, not because it is trying, but because that is its nature. Release the how. Not once, in a single dramatic act of surrender, but again and again, every time the mind reaches for the planning and the strategizing and the anxious calculation of pathways. Release it gently. Release it the way you would release a breath you have been holding too long. With relief rather than effort. With the recognition that what you are releasing is not control but the illusion of control, and that what you are receiving in exchange is something infinitely more valuable. Trust the interval. Trust the silence. Trust the waiting. Trust the days when nothing appears to be moving, and the outer world looks unchanged, and the mind offers its familiar inventory of reasons to doubt. Because the silence is not absence. It is the sound of the bridge being built. And the waiting is not emptiness. It is the fullness of a process that has not yet broken the surface, but is moving, always moving, toward the moment when it will. I want to close our time together with a practice that I am going to ask you to carry with you, not just today, but into every day of the interval that follows. Every morning, before the mind has fully engaged with the machinery of the day, before the calculations begin and the news arrives, and the outer world reasserts its claim on your attention, I want you to take 60 seconds. Just 60 seconds. And in those 60 seconds, I want you to do one thing. Feel the bridge. Not see it. Not plan it. Not evaluate the likelihood of it. Feel it. Feel the reality of a process that is working on your behalf right now, in this moment, with full knowledge of the terrain and full access to every resource required. Feel the particular quality of peace that belongs to someone who knows the destination is fixed and the bridge is under construction, and the only thing required of them is to remain the person who is going there. Let that feeling, however slight, however tentative, anchor the frequency of your day. And then go about your life. Fully. Presently. With the open eyes of someone who knows the bridge, incidents will look entirely natural when they appear, and who is therefore paying gentle, unforced attention to the ordinary texture of their days, not with the anxious vigilance of someone scanning for signs, but with the relaxed awareness of someone who knows that what is coming will make itself known when it is ready. And when the incident comes, and it will come, when the unexpected email arrives, or the conversation takes its sudden, surprising turn, or the door closes in a way that feels like loss, but carries within it the first step of the route to everything you have been assuming, meet it with the recognition it deserves. Not surprise. Recognition. The recognition of someone who always knew the bridge was coming and is simply, gratefully stepping onto it. Caroline knew it in the moment she read Diane's email. Not because she had predicted it, because she recognized it. The way you recognize a face you have seen before in a different context. The way you recognize the answer to a question you had stopped expecting to be answered. The way you recognize the bridge when you finally step onto it after a long time of standing on the near shore wondering if it would ever appear. It appears. it always appears. And it will appear for you. At the right time. Through the right door. In the form that the intelligence building it knows is the most direct and most elegant route from where you are to where you have assumed yourself to be. Trust that. Not as a hope. Not as a wish. Not as the consolation of someone who is trying to feel better about an uncertain situation. As a known fact about how consciousness operates in this world. As the settled, unargued, deeply felt certainty of someone who has understood, at the level where understanding becomes transformation, that the outer world is always, without exception, the shadow of the inner world. That the bridge is always, without exception, the natural outworking of the assumption. That the law is always, without exception, working in your favor the moment you work with it. The bridge is being built. Do not interfere. Do not reach into the earth and disturb the root. Do not grab the wheel from the intelligence that can see the whole road at once. Do not abandon the near shore because the bridge has not yet come into view. Stand still in the faith that is not certainty but commitment. In the trust that is not the absence of doubt but the decision to return to the assumption regardless of it. In the peace that is not the peace of someone who has everything they desired, not yet, but the peace of someone who knows, with a quiet, unshakable knowing of a person who has understood the law, that everything they have assumed is already real in the only place where reality begins. In consciousness. In the I am. In the invisible field where every bridge ever built was first conceived, before a single incident of it appeared in the world that the senses can see and the hands can touch and the frightened mind can finally, gratefully, stop doubting. The bridge is coming. It is already on its way. And you, my friend, have always been worthy of the crossing. Go well. Go gently. And go in the absolute, untroubled certainty that what you have assumed is already yours.